Hey guys, okay, so I am ready for some serious backlash to this video. So I want to maybe just clarify a few things before we start. Numero uno, criticizing someone from the same general ideological sphere as you is not always infighting or trying to start drama. Sometimes you just have genuine critiques of another person. So before the cries of, "You're just jealous she got to hang out with Kanye," or "You're just salty you didn't get free Yeezy Season 6" begin, I will have you all know I have nothing personally against Candace Owens. This video is structured around politics, not personal life, and I just really think there's an important conversation to be had regarding both Owens, Turning Point USA, and their founder, Charlie Kirk. I also think it's just a bit of a disingenuous practice that people partake in to wipe aside any and all critiques of them by saying it's jealousy or people trying to get attention or start drama. Sometimes people just want an engaged conversation and have no interest in the drama aspect of it. And I think this video is that. So take it as you will. If you don't know what Turning Point USA is, they are a conservative think tank of sorts whose stated mission is to educate students about true free market values. Their president is pundit and author Charlie Kirk. Now lately, Charlie and Turning Point USA have received a ton of press because one of their more recent members, conservative commentator Candace Owens, became a star overnight when Kanye West tweeted out that he loves the way she thinks. Of course, one of the world's most famous rappers endorsing a random right-wing e-celeb took the news by storm, and since then, Candace and Charlie have been receiving back-to-back coverage from news organizations. Even meeting with the Trump family, they're constantly on Fox News. It's been a pretty wild ride to watch. Now, I will say, I do find it a little ironic that conservatives who have been so anti-celebrity are suddenly head over heels for Kanye, but overall, I do think it's a good thing that some different views are being brought to the mainstream, no matter who's doing it. Where my contention with Turning Point USA comes up is their use of identity politics, or rather, their identity politics for me, but not for the mindset. But before we jump into the specifics of that, let's define identity politics. Identity politics is something, as of late, that we mostly attribute to the left or progressives, the people who will shriek about diversity quotas and use half a student budget on LGBT feminist Marxist clubs. It's typically defined as creating exclusive political alliances or groups based on religion, race, gender, or even social background. Now, over the years, I have been a harsh critic of this type of politics, quite openly. But about a year ago, I did a video acknowledging that I'd thrown the baby out with the bathwater by rejecting identity politics altogether. In fact, today I've really come to the conclusion that all politics is based on identity, and maybe the problem with liberal identity politics, or rather SJW identity politics, isn't that they're putting people into groups, but rather that they're prioritizing the wrong groups. When politicians support policies or promote ideas, they typically do them in the form of, "This is going to help group XYZ." It's too difficult to make broad-based federal policies for every single individual. We can't have Frank, Hank, and Adam all having a different policy, so we have to categorize. It's just how things work. Now, I'd much prefer a political party focus their efforts on, say, preserving Western identity, which has formed much of America and Canada, over, say, focusing on an obscure pansexual community identity. Overall, I don't have much problem with people addressing identity within politics. What would probably separate me from your average SJW is that I just think identity goes beyond skin color or gender and has cultural, familial, historical, and ideological ties as well. However, much of the modern right wing, and certainly the kind of skeptic or classical liberal community, object to identity politics altogether, saying things like identity politics is cancer at a Young Republicans event may as well be the same as stating your harsh stance against murder, rape, or beating up puppies at this point. It's an easy way to get some cheap claps and likes in right-wing circles. And I do accept rejecting all identity politics and being hyper-individualist as a legitimate political viewpoint. My issue is that 90% of the time, the people on the right claiming they reject identity politics altogether are taking part in it just as much as the left when it comes to practice. And that brings me back to Turning Point USA and Candace Owens, who I believe are a perfect example of just this. Both Charlie Kirk, the leader of Turning Point USA, and Candace, their most famous member, have been crusaders against the idea of identity politics for the last year. Candace has done speeches on how horrible it is. Charlie Kirk is known for his tweets such as, "Judge people as individuals, not as part of a collective or some fictitious identity group." And to clarify even further on this, Charlie has stated that race itself is one of those fictitious identity groups. The concept of race is totally made up. It is not rooted in genetics or science, yet the left wants us to allow people into college based on race, support groups that are race-based like Black Lives Matter. Why is the left so obsessed with something not rooted in science? To me, this collection of statements kind of portrays a clear stance on the issue of identity politics. Charlie has essentially said we should judge people as individuals, we shouldn't support race-based groups, and in fact, race itself doesn't even exist and is a tool of leftists for political gain. Candace Owens similarly echoed this view, saying race is a business. Don't you ever forget that. People like Al Sharpton, Maxine Waters, and Jesse Jackson are the top executives. Up until this point, all of these statements seem pretty consistent, so you can imagine my shock when I read a tweet from Charlie Kirk stating, "I hired Candace Owens 4 minutes after meeting her. She told me she was going to lead the ideological Black revolution against the Democrats and leftists. I knew she could and would do it. 95% of Blacks vote for policies and leaders that harm them. The exit is happening." Did the crusader against identity politics, Charlie Kirk, just state that he hired Candace Owens because of her race and because she was planning on helping an identity group vote for policies that would help them? I may agree with Charlie on a decent amount, but this is just not adding up with the previous line of thinking sold by Turning Point USA. It gets more confusing when you remember that Kirk has stated race does not exist. So how can you lead an ideological revolution for something that does not exist? As with the left, it seems pretty clear that this race doesn't exist quote by Kirk was just a talking point. Much like his rejection of identity politics, it's just something that people want to hear and not actually something that is being practiced by, quite frankly, some of the most popular figures on the right at the moment. And here's where it starts to become more obvious that Turning Point USA, this isn't just a recent thing for them. They have always taken part in identity politics. Hence why they have a Latino leadership summit. It's why they have a young women's leadership summit. It's why they even have a Black leadership summit. All of these summits are based on identity. I couldn't attend the Young Black Leadership Summit because of my skin color. Yet Charlie Kirk, Candace Owens, and the rest of Turning Point USA claim they hate identity politics and race does not exist. That doesn't add up no matter how I do the math. We all know Turning Point USA would never hold a Young European Leadership Summit. We all know Kirk would never hire a white guy who stated he wanted to lead an ideological white revolution, let alone tweet that out proudly to the world. And sure, you can factor in his argument that 95% of Blacks are voting for policies that hurt them, so you need to focus in on that group, but hell, a significant amount of whites are voting for mass affirmative action hiring and anti-white Marxist education policies. Yet mainstream conservatives would never endorse a #white awakening representative. And just as a side note, you probably won't see #Asian awakening or #Indian awakening anytime soon either, because those two groups just don't quite get enough political clout. The reason Kirk will have a Latino summit but not a European summit is because that kind of identity politics is highly unpopular in our culture, and they may lose funding or support for doing it. And hell, just to be fair, Turning Point USA probably wouldn't hold a transgender summit either, because conservatism hasn't quite been liberalized to that point yet. They haven't quite accepted that identity politics for political purposes. But give it 5 to 10 years when conservatives have given even more land to liberals, and you'll probably see the TPUSA LGBT summit. That's a bit of a tongue twister. When you factor all of this in, it really does appear that the actions of mainstream groups like Turning Point USA have little to do with principle and a heck of a lot more to do with business or political campaign strategy, the same way the left use identity and race, and exactly how Candace Owens would describe it. Race is a business, and looking at all of this, in my opinion, business is a booming on both sides of the political spectrum. In fact, much of Candace Owens' timeline is speaking specifically about #Black America and what's good for Black votes, what's good for Black consciousness, what's going to benefit Blacks as an identity group. And I don't actually have a problem with this. I think Candace may very well do a lot of good for the Black community. What I have a problem with is groups like Turning Point USA and people in the mainstream right pretending they don't partake in identity politics when they so obviously do. Now, some people will look to me and say, Lauren, this is obviously an optics game. Or, Lauren, right now, in order to defeat identity politics, we have to play identity politics. Or in order to win the ideological war, we have to focus on certain voting blocks and groups. Winning the Black vote is important. And I get that, fine. But after making a statement like that, you cannot turn around with your slogan of identity politics is cancer and denounce, say, the alt-right, who also argue that whites need to strategically vote and identify as a bloc in order to win some bigger, more significant goal. And you certainly can't criticize the left, who say minorities need to organize by identity in order to protect themselves or reach some greater political goal. If you start playing by the rules of identity politics, you can't scream at how unethical everyone else is for doing just that. And in the bigger picture here, eventually as more and more conservatives go on TV and begin their conversations with as a woman or as a leader of the Black ideological revolution, more and more people are going to be skeptical of the argument that the right is anti-identity politics, and they're going to want answers for this. It seems like conservatives as a whole need to have a serious and honest conversation about whether or not they actually reject identity politics or only identity politics for certain groups, or at least discuss how much of the left's game they are willing to play to win, and whether or not they'll lose themselves in the process of playing that game as they have time and time again. Anyways, I appreciate you guys watching my rant. Just had to get that out of my system, been thinking about it a lot, and I'm a little intrigued and terrified to read the comments section, but I appreciate you guys engaging and watching this. I'll catch you next time.
We will make America great again.